All coincidences with real people are random. If they tell you that this is not the case, ignore them. New York City, night. The city that never sleeps was shrouded in darkness, with only the dim light of street lamps piercing through the thick fog. On one of the rooftops in the heart of Manhattan stood Peter Parker, better known as Spider-Man. He felt a sense of unease that had been gnawing at him for days, as though something evil and terrifying awaited him just around the corner. An alert shattered his thoughts. Peter leapt down between the skyscrapers, his web intertwining with the cold night air as he flew toward the unknown. A building in Soho, blazing lights, screams, and police sirens. Peter landed on the roof of a nearby building and froze, seeing him. The Green Goblin, one of his most dangerous enemies, stood amidst fire and chaos. His mask reflected malice and rage, and his eye sockets burned with a hellish fire. "Well, hello," Spider-Man the Goblin said in a sinister voice. "It's been a while." "What are you up to?" Goblin Peter shouted, his heart pounding. "All your troubles started with me, didn't they?" "I'm here to finish what I started," said the Goblin, pulling a grenade with green smoke from behind his back. He hurled it straight at Peter. The grenade exploded, enveloping Spider-Man in poisonous gas. Peter felt his lungs fill with poison, and his consciousness began to fade. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the Goblin's cruel laughter, filling his mind with horror and pain. Peter woke up in a hospital, surrounded by sterile white walls and the sounds of medical equipment. His body felt weak, and his mind was shrouded in darkness. He couldn't remember how he ended up here, but he knew something had gone terribly wrong. "Peter." "Thank God you're awake, Mary Jane." His loyal friend was sitting by his bedside. Worry and fear shone in her eyes. "What happened?" Peter asked, his voice weak and hoarse. "You've been missing for a few days. The police found you unconscious in Soho. They don't know what happened, but they say it's connected to the Green Goblin." Peter felt something break inside him. Memories of the last encounter with the Goblin pierced his mind, filling him with terror and pain. He tried to get up, but his body wouldn't obey. Something was very wrong. "Mary Jane, I can't use my powers," he whispered, fear clutching at his heart. "What do you mean?" She looked at him in horror. "My strength, my web. It's all gone. I don't feel like Spider-Man anymore." Emotional pain and fear filled Peter, his thoughts swirling in chaos. Without his powers, he felt vulnerable and helpless. The inner darkness began to consume his soul, causing doubts and fears. Weeks passed, and Peter couldn't return to his former life. His nightmares became unbearable, each night haunted by images of the Green Goblin and his cruel laughter. He felt his soul teetering on the brink of collapse. Mary Jane did everything she could to support him, but Peter was sinking deeper into darkness. He sought answers but was met only with hopelessness and fear each time. His life, once filled with the fight for justice, had turned into a nightmare from which he could not escape. Peter sat in his room, exhausted and desperate. In his hands was a photograph of his Uncle Ben, the man who had always been his role model. He knew he had let him down, that he had let everyone he loved down. "Uncle Ben, what should I do?" Peter whispered, tears streaming down his face. Suddenly, his phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen. "Peter Parker," a cold voice said, "if you want to know the truth about your powers, come to the Oscorp building at sunset." Peter felt fear and curiosity grip him. He didn't know what awaited him, but he understood that this was his chance to reclaim his life or lose it entirely. The sunset bathed New York in a crimson light, giving the city a sinister appearance. Peter stood before the Oscorp building, his heart pounding. He knew it was a trap, but he had no choice. Entering the building, he felt cold and empty. The place seemed abandoned, covered in dust and cobwebs. Peter ascended to the top floor, where Norman Osborn's laboratory once stood, the man who had become the Green Goblin. "Glad you came," Peter, a voice emerged from the shadows. The Green Goblin stepped into the light, his mask gleaming menacingly in the dim illumination. "What did you do to my powers?" Peter shouted, his voice filled with rage and despair. "Oh, Peter," the Goblin sneered. "It wasn't me. It was you. Your fears, your doubts, your pains. You stripped yourself of your power. Peter felt the goblin's words penetrate his soul, filling him with horror and despair. He knew the goblin was right. His inner demons were destroying him, stripping him of his strength and will to fight. But don't worry, Peter the goblin continued. I'll help you end your suffering, once and for all. The goblin lunged at Peter with fury, hurling bombs and firing from his glider. Peter tried to dodge, but his body was too weak. He fell, each movement labored. The goblin struck him over and over, reveling in his suffering. This is the end, Peter. Your days as Spider-Man are over, the goblin said, his voice brimming with malice. Peter lay on the ground, battered and exhausted. His heart beat slowly, and his mind was shrouded in darkness. He knew this was the end. He could no longer fight. I'm sorry, Uncle Ben, he whispered, his voice weak and hoarse. I failed you. The goblin stood over Peter, his sinister mask reflecting the light of the street lamps. He savored his victory, knowing he had finally destroyed his archenemy. Goodbye, Spider-Man, the goblin said, and threw the last grenade. The explosion shattered the night's silence, and the Oscorp building collapsed in flames and chaos. Peter lay among the debris, his body motionless and his eyes closed. He no longer felt pain, no longer heard the screams, no longer saw the light. New York mourned its hero. People spoke of his bravery, of his strength and courage, but no one knew of his inner struggle, of the demons that tormented his soul. Spider-Man had fallen, his life brief but bright. He fought for justice, but his own fears and pains became his downfall. The goblin triumphed, and darkness enveloped New York, robbing it of light and hope.